Most people know adamantine as this legendary fantasy metal, this indestructible alloy of incredible wealth and power. In modern times, it has been popularized in Dungeons & Dragons as the tabletop's precious metal, in Marvel through adamantium found in Captain America's shield or Wolverine's claws, and there are even some references in The Lord of the Rings. But how did it all begin? Where did it come from? And how did we get here? As is usually the case, the answer lies in the very distant past, in Greek mythology. Thousands upon thousands of years ago, the Greeks used the word adamos to describe something untamable. Untamable meaning indestructible in every sense of the word. One who was adamatos could not be conquered, could not be tamed, could not be penetrated. Again and again, weapons and objects that were described to possess an adamato property were used in some of Greek mythology's most famous moments. It was with an adamantine sword that Perseus slayed the vicious Medusa, an adamantine sickle that the titan Kronos used against his father Uranus, and of course, Prometheus, as his punishment for stealing the fire from the gods and granting it to humanity, was bound with adamantine chains by the god Hephaestus to be eaten for all eternity by an eagle. It is from this word that the present-day diamond and adamant come from, which find their origins from the Greek-inspired Latin adamantz, which eventually made its way to France as diamant and the English words we know today. The Greeks used the word to describe something particularly hard, such as steel or diamond, which eventually led to the word gaining an independent meaning as a separate, hard object with a mythological side to it. Adamant was thus used by non-Greeks who interacted with the Greeks in a variety of settings. In Virgil's Aeneid, for example, the gate of Tartarus itself, deep within the underworld, is built out of pillars of solid adamant, which were completely and utterly indestructible, protected even from the hands of the gods. In later works such as John Milton's Paradise Lost, adamantine itself is mentioned numerous times, largely in relation to Satan and his realm. His chains were made of adamant, as were the gates of hell and the armor of his demons. In Dante's Purgatorio, it is upon a throne of adamant that the angel at the gates of purgatory sits upon, and the references to adamant go on and on, from Spenser's Fairy Queen all the way to J.R.R. Tolkien himself. Within The Lord of the Rings, Barad-dûr, Sauron's dark tower of sorcery, is partly built from what Tolkien simply calls adamant, which is the same material that, most importantly, was used while forging the great ring Nenya, worn by the Lady Galadriel. Adamant was the white stone that sat at its core, which is what gave it its name, Ring of Adamant. In the 20th century, with the ancient foundations of the word truly entrenched in the popular imagination, combined with an explosion of fantasy literature and media, modern-day adamantine was born. While previously it was merely a word used to describe something indestructible and eventually came to mean diamond, it was in the 20th century that artists and writers took the material from its archaic origins in describing something hard to a truly fantastical, legendary metal alloy of supernatural strength, with a unique backstory and role within a consistent narrative. A particularly influential addition to the subject came in the 1941 short story by Malcolm Jameson called Devil's Powder, in which we have one of the first appearances of the now famous pseudo-Latin adamantium, while in 1956's Forbidden Planet the notable appearance of true adamantine steel. In terms of Marvel specifically, the fantastical alloy adamantium first appeared in the 1969 66th issue Avengers comic in describing the outer shell of Ultron. From then on, it was used on objects such as Deadpool's katanas, mixed with vibranium for Captain's shield, and of course, it's what makes up the skeleton and claws of Wolverine. In AD&D's first edition player handbook in 1978, Gary Gygax introduced for the first time in D&D adamantite. This largely had the properties we're familiar with today, though it was eventually changed to adamantine by the second edition of the game. The metal went on to be featured in the very popular Salvatore books for D&D and came to be particularly connected to the drow. Though within the D&D canon it was originally a metal, in later editions it became the ore from which the metal adamant was extracted, until it was ultimately decided that adamantine as a whole was, in fact, a metal originating from meteors. Nonetheless, mythology and literature of the past, in combination with fictional works of the last 100 years especially, cemented adamantine or adamant into the popular fantasy culture as something entirely new, and not just an adjective. Games like World of Warcraft, Terraria, and Final Fantasy with their adamantite, The Elder Scrolls with its adamantium, or even The Sims with its adamantal have since introduced their own variations of this metal, which, despite of increased differences as it became more popular, such as in appearance, has maintained certain somewhat consistent characteristics. It is naturally very rare, it is defined by its strength and indestructibility, and, importantly, it is a malleable metal. This, in fact, is one of the most fantastical aspects as, after all, not only is it incredibly hard, but can also be forged into anything, and particularly weapons and armor. This usually requires specific and very difficult techniques in order to work the metal, rare forges and mystical processes, or in other cases, some other science-esque solutions. This aspect of the metal plays an important role within the narratives of the stories it exists in, as adamantine can oftentimes be used as a tool through which to drive things forward. In Baldur's Gate 3, for example, in order to obtain adamantine gear, the player needs to unlock the ancient and long-forgotten adamantine forge, the only place that can make it. To do this, the player must explore, find a way through, and gain more experience while doing so, with adamantine serving as the powerful reward at the end. As such, adamantium, adamant, or adamantine has also been described with the humorous unobtainium, a term often used in reference to a specific material that is either too perfect to exist and holds all of the properties required for a task that often contradict one another, or is just so rare that it might as well not exist anyway. A massive thank you to my channel members, and thank you very much for watching.